Hannah's hands trembled as she knelt beside the stranger on the empty road. His breathing was shallow, his face twisted in pain. Her children cried from behind her, begging her to leave him. 3 years ago, she would have walked past without a second glance. But loss had changed her. It had carved out something deep inside, leaving room for a mercy she didn't know she possessed. The sun was setting fast, and she had to choose. She didn't know that saving this man's life would force her to confront the cruelest person in their small Texas town, and that he was lying right there, gasping for air at her feet. Before we begin, if you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to our channel. We're working hard to reach 1,000 subscribers so we can keep bringing you powerful, emotional stories like this one. Your support means everything. The Texas sun burned low on the horizon, painting the rural road in shades of amber and rust. Hannah Miller pushed her worn shopping cart along the gravel shoulder, each step sending small clouds of dust into the heavy air. The wheels squeaked rhythmically, a lonely sound that had become the soundtrack of her life. She was 32 years old, though her hands looked older, cracked and weathered from work that never seemed to end. Her dark hair, pulled back in a practical ponytail, showed threads of grey that hadn't been there 2 years ago. 2 years since the accident. 2 years since the construction site collapse that took Michael from her. 2 years of learning that widows in small towns become invisible. Cars passed without slowing, their headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. No one stopped. No one ever stopped. Hannah had grown used to being overlooked, her presence as unremarkable as the fence posts lining the road. Inside the cart, barely $20 worth of groceries shifted with each bump: discount bread, canned vegetables, a small carton of milk. She'd done the math 3 times in the store, putting items back, choosing carefully. Logan needed new shoes, but that would have to wait another month, maybe 2. Her trailer sat another mile down the road, tucked behind an abandoned gas station that had closed years ago. It wasn't much, rusted at the corners, the door that stuck in humid weather, the bathroom sink that dripped no matter how tight she turned the handle. But it was theirs, for now. The sky deepened to purple, and Hannah felt the familiar weight settle on her chest. The weight of being alone, of being responsible for 3 small lives when she could barely keep herself afloat. Tired of walking this road day after day, watching the world speed past without a glance. Logan would be waiting with Maya and Ellie, 8 years old, and he'd already learned to heat up canned soup, to check that his sisters brushed their teeth, to lock the door behind her when she left. Too serious, too old for his age. Sometimes she caught him staring out the window with an expression that broke her heart, the look of a child who'd stopped believing in better things. Maya, 6 years old, had her father's eyes. She sang to Ellie when the little one couldn't sleep, made up stories about princesses who lived in trailers and ate soup for dinner. Her optimism felt fragile, like glass Hannah was terrified of breaking. And Ellie, 3 years old and sick too often, fevers that spiked without warning, a cough that rattled in her small chest. Hannah had taken her to the free clinic twice last month, received the same advice: rest, fluids and medications she couldn't afford. The temperature dropped as darkness claimed the road. Hannah pulled her thin jacket tighter, knowing she should walk faster, but exhaustion had seeped into her bones. 1 foot in front of the other. That was all she could manage. 1 foot, then another, then another. She didn't notice the skid marks until she was almost on top of them, long black streaks carved into the asphalt, leading off the road into the shallow ditch. Her cart stopped. Her breath caught. Something large and dark hulked in the failing light. A truck, she realized, crumpled against an old oak tree, its front end destroyed, and beside it, sprawled on the ground like discarded clothing, was a man. Hannah's first instinct was to keep walking, to pretend she hadn't seen. This was how people survived, by not getting involved, by protecting themselves and their own. The smart thing would be to hurry home, call from the gas station payphone if it still worked. But her feet carried her forward instead, cart abandoned on the roadside. As she drew closer, she could see he was breathing, shallow, labored breaths that rattled in his chest. His face was turned away, but she could see the unnatural angle of his leg, the way his jacket was torn and darkened with something wet. "Sir?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Can you hear me?" He stirred, and when his face turned toward her, Hannah felt ice slide down her spine. His eyes, even clouded with pain, held something hard and dangerous. This was not a kind man. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But she thought of Michael, of how he'd died alone while she was home with the children, of how she'd wanted, prayed, that someone had been there, that he hadn't faced those final moments in solitude. Hannah knelt in the dirt beside a stranger who frightened her and made a choice that would change everything. What Hannah doesn't know yet is that the man bleeding before her is the most feared person in their county, and helping him will put her family in the crosshairs of everyone who wants him dead. The man's eyes locked onto Hannah's, and for a moment neither of them moved. His breathing came in ragged gasps, each one seeming to cost him everything. Blood had dried in dark streaks down the side of his face, and his shirt was torn open, revealing bruised ribs that looked wrong, misshapen. "Don't move me," he managed, his voice like gravel scraping against metal. Even injured, even broken on the side of a forgotten road, there was command in his tone, authority, the kind that came from years of being obeyed without question. Hannah's hands hovered uselessly. She had no medical training, no phone, no way to call for help. The nearest house was half a mile back, and she couldn't leave him here in the dark. Coyotes came out at night. She'd heard them howling from her trailer, their cries carrying across the empty land. "I need to get help," she said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew it was too late. The sky had turned from purple to black, and the road stretched empty in both directions. No headlights, no salvation coming. The man's hand shot out and gripped her wrist with surprising strength. No hospitals. His eyes bored into hers, desperate and dangerous all at once. No cops. Every alarm bell in Hannah's mind rang at once. This was wrong. This was how women ended up on the news, how families got destroyed by trying to help the wrong person. She should pull away, should run, should protect herself. But she thought of Michael again, of the life draining out of him while strangers passed by. She heard the crunch of footsteps on gravel before she saw them. Logan appeared first, his small face tight with worry, Maya clutching his hand, and little Ellie balanced on his hip in a way that made Hannah's heart crack. 8 years old and already playing father to his sisters. "Mama!" Logan's voice shook. "We heard the cart. You didn't come home." Maya's eyes went wide when she saw the man on the ground. Ellie started to whimper, that pre-cry sound that Hannah knew would escalate into wailing within seconds. "It's okay, babies," Hannah said, though nothing about this was okay. "This man needs help. We should go." Logan's voice was firm, older than his years. "Mama, we should go right now." The man tried to sit up and failed, collapsing back with a groan that sounded like it came from somewhere deep and broken inside him. His leg bent at an angle that made Maya turn away and bury her face in Logan's shoulder. Hannah made a calculation she'd have to live with forever. The trailer was closer than anything else. She couldn't carry him alone, but she could help him walk. She had bandages, old ones but clean. She had water. She had a couch that sagged in the middle but would hold a wounded man. "Logan, take your sisters home. I'm going to help this man to the trailer." "No," Logan's face set in stubborn lines. "No, Mama, something's wrong. I can feel it." Children knew things adults tried to rationalize away. Logan felt it, the wrongness radiating off this stranger like heat off summer asphalt. Hannah knelt so she was eye level with her son. "If it were your father lying there," she said quietly, "if it were Daddy hurt and alone, I would pray that someone would help him." The words hit Logan like a physical blow. His lips trembled, and for a moment he was 6 years old again, asking when Daddy was coming home. Maya started crying softly behind him. "Help me get him up," Hannah said. Together, with Logan supporting one side and Hannah taking the man's weight on the other, they managed to get him to his feet. He was heavy, solid with muscle despite the injuries. Every step seemed to tear something inside him, his breathing turning to barely suppressed groans. Ellie walked beside them, her small hand gripping Hannah's jacket, her eyes huge and frightened in the darkness. The trailer appeared ahead, its windows dark, the metal siding reflecting the moon like tarnished silver. Hannah had never been more aware of how small it was, how vulnerable. She was bringing a stranger into the only safe space her children had, a man who wouldn't go to the hospital, who feared the police, whose eyes held secrets that might swallow them all. But the decision was made. The line was crossed. They half-carried, half-dragged him up the 2 concrete blocks that served as steps. Inside, the trailer smelled like the bean soup she'd left warming on the stove. The man collapsed onto the couch, his face grey with pain, his breathing shallow. Hannah looked at her children's frightened faces and wondered what she had just invited into their lives. Tomorrow, Hannah will discover the truth about the man bleeding on her couch and why everyone in town would rather see him dead than saved. The night stretched long and merciless. Hannah worked by the dim light of the kitchen's single bulb, cleaning the stranger's wounds with trembling hands and water she'd boiled on the ancient stove. She used the last of their hydrogen peroxide, watching it foam pink against torn skin. His leg was definitely broken, maybe his ribs too. Every breath he took sounded wet and wrong. Logan sat in the corner with Maya and Ellie, a human barrier between his sisters and the man on their couch. His eyes never left the stranger's face, watching for danger, the way a rabbit watches a snake. The man drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes mumbling words Hannah couldn't catch. When his eyes opened, they held that same hardness, a gaze that had seen too much and caused too much to ever truly soften. By dawn, Hannah had done all she could. She'd wrapped his ribs with strips torn from an old bedsheet, splintered his leg with wooden spoons and duct tape. It was crude, desperate work, but it was something. The bleeding had stopped. She fed her children breakfast, the soup from last night, reheated, and sent them to stay with Mrs. Chen next door, an elderly woman who watched them sometimes when Hannah worked her scattered cleaning jobs. Maya clung to her, not wanting to leave, her small fingers digging into Hannah's arm. "I don't like him, Mama," Maya whispered. "He feels like thunder before it breaks." Children and their instincts. Hannah kissed her daughter's forehead and promised everything would be okay. A lie that tasted bitter on her tongue. If this story is touching your heart, please take a moment to subscribe and hit the notification bell. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and your support helps us continue sharing these powerful tales. Thank you for being part of this journey. By mid-morning, Hannah heard the knock she'd been dreading. She opened the door to find Marcus Wells, who ran the auto repair shop in town, standing on her makeshift steps with a face carved from concern and fear. Hannah. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "People are saying you brought someone here last night, from the crash out on Miller Road." Word traveled fast in small towns. Someone must have seen them, or noticed the wrecked truck at first light. "He was hurt," Hannah said simply. "I couldn't leave him." Marcus finally looked at her, and what she saw in his expression made her stomach turn to ice. Not anger, pity. "You don't know who he is, do you?" The question hung between them like smoke. Inside, Hannah heard the stranger stir, groaning as consciousness dragged him back to his broken body. "His name is Victor Crowley," Marcus said quietly, and the name landed like a stone in dark water. "Hannah, you need to put him back on the road, right now, before people find out he's here." Victor Crowley. Even Hannah, isolated in her grief and poverty, knew that name. Everyone in the county knew it. Marcus continued, his words rushing out like he needed to purge them. 5 years ago, Victor bought up half the farmland south of here. Families who'd worked that soil for generations. He gave them 30 days to vacate. Prices so low it was basically theft. Anyone who fought back found their wells contaminated, their equipment vandalized, their livestock dead. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. Some say worse than that, things that couldn't be proven. Hannah's hands went cold. Through the open door she could see Victor's form on her couch, could hear his labored breathing. "The Hutchinson family, you remember them? He foreclosed on their ranch 2 winters ago. They lost everything. Jim Hutchinson tried to fight it in court, and suddenly there were tax liens, legal fees that buried them." Marcus stepped closer. "The youngest daughter, Emma, she was going to college, had a scholarship and everything. After they lost the ranch, she had to drop out. Last I heard, she was working 3rd shift at a truck stop in Oklahoma." Each word was a hammer blow. Hannah thought of Maya's dreams, of the way her daughter still believed the world held magic and possibility. "There's more," Marcus said. "The construction company your Michael worked for, the one that cut corners on safety, that didn't maintain the scaffolding properly." He paused, letting the implications sink in like poison. Victor had financial ties to that company. Not direct ownership, too smart for that, but enough connection that when inspectors started asking questions, everything got buried under lawyers and paperwork. The world tilted. Hannah gripped the doorframe, her knuckles white. Her husband, her Michael. The accident that left her alone with 3 children and nothing, and this man bleeding on her couch might have had blood on his hands even then. "Get him out," Marcus said, his voice gentle but urgent. "Hannah, people around here, they've been waiting for something like this, waiting for Victor Crowley to be vulnerable. If they find out you're protecting him—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Hannah looked back into her trailer at the broken man who might be a monster and felt the first tendrils of real fear wrap around her heart. What Hannah doesn't know is that Victor is fully conscious and has heard every word, and that the cruel man everyone fears is about to witness something that will shatter everything he thought he knew about power. Marcus left with his warnings hanging in the air like a curse. Hannah closed the door and leaned against it, her legs suddenly weak. Inside the trailer, silence pressed down like a physical weight. She turned to find Victor Crowley's eyes open, watching her. He'd heard everything. Every word Marcus had spoken, every accusation, every crime laid at his feet. "You should listen to him," Victor said, his voice rough as gravel. "Put me back on the road." Hannah said nothing. She walked to the small kitchen and began preparing the thin oatmeal that would be lunch. Her hands moved automatically, measuring water, adding the cheap oats, stirring. The spoon scraped against the bottom of the dented pot, a rhythmic sound that filled the terrible silence. Days passed in a strange, suspended reality. Victor couldn't walk, could barely sit up without pain shooting through his broken ribs. Hannah tended to him with mechanical efficiency, changing bandages, bringing water, helping him to the bathroom with her eyes averted and her jaw set. Mrs. Chen brought the children back after 3 days, her face troubled but kind. Logan walked through the door and immediately positioned himself between Victor and his sisters. That same protective stance that broke Hannah's heart a little more each time she saw it. Victor watched them. He had no choice. Trapped on that sagging couch, he became a witness to a life he'd never truly seen before. He watched Logan divide a single sandwich into 3 careful portions, giving the largest piece to Ellie, the middle to Maya, keeping the smallest for himself. The boy's hands were steady, practiced. This wasn't the first time he'd split too little food between too many mouths. He watched Maya sing softly to Ellie when the little one's cough got bad at night, her voice sweet and clear in the darkness, making up lyrics about flowers that bloomed even in winter, about birds that carried wishes to heaven. He watched Hannah at the kitchen table after the children slept, sorting through bills by the light of a single lamp. She'd spread them out like cards in a losing hand: electricity, water, the medical bills from Ellie's clinic visits. She'd move money from one pile to another, her lips moving silently as she calculated, recalculated, trying to make numbers work that would never add up. One evening, Victor realized Hannah hadn't eaten. He'd watched her serve the children their dinner, canned beans and rice, taking nothing for herself. When they asked, she smiled and said she'd eaten earlier. But Victor had been there all day. He knew it was a lie. The next morning, Logan asked for lunch money, just $5 for the week. Hannah's face went carefully blank. That expression Victor was learning meant she was calculating impossibilities. "Baby, we're doing home lunch this week, remember?" Her voice was bright, false. "I'll make you something special." Logan's face crumpled for just a second before he forced it smooth again. 8 years old and already learning to hide disappointment, to accept that special meant another peanut butter sandwich on discount bread. Victor lay on that couch, surrounded by poverty he'd never had to witness up close. Poverty he'd helped create through evictions, foreclosures, business deals that crushed small families under the weight of legal fees and impossible terms. One night, Ellie woke up burning with fever. Hannah gathered her up, but Victor could see the panic in her eyes. This wasn't the first fever, and it was worse than before. The child's breathing sounded wet and labored, her small chest heaving with each breath. "Hospital," Victor said from the couch. "I can't afford—" Hannah's voice cracked. "I'll pay for it." "You don't have your wallet, you don't have anything." Her words came out harsh, edged with desperation. Victor gave her a phone number, made her write it down. "Call that number. Tell them who I am. Tell them I need cash delivered here. They'll come." Hannah stared at him, Ellie limp and burning in her arms. "And what will that cost me?" The question hit like a fist. What will this cost me? How many people had asked him that over the years, knowing that Victor Crowley never gave anything without taking something more valuable in return? "Nothing," he said quietly. "It costs you nothing." She didn't believe him. He could see it in her eyes. But Ellie moaned, and Hannah made the call. The money came within 2 hours, a man in an expensive suit who looked at the trailer with barely disguised disgust, who handed over an envelope of cash and left without a word. Hannah took Ellie to the emergency room, leaving Logan and Maya with Mrs. Chen. Victor lay alone in the trailer, listening to the drip of the kitchen faucet, the creak of cheap walls settling. He thought about Jim Hutchinson's daughter, working third shift at a truck stop instead of finishing college. He thought about all the families he'd evicted, displaced, destroyed. He'd told himself they were business decisions, numbers on paper, necessary casualties of progress and profit. But they were Logan, rationing food for his sisters. They were Maya, singing hope into darkness. They were Ellie, small and sick and born into a world that had already decided she didn't matter. They were Hannah, walking alone on dark roads, pushing a cart with $20 worth of groceries, invisible to every car that passed. For the first time in decades, something Victor Crowley thought had died long ago began to stir in his chest. Something that felt dangerously close to shame. When Hannah returns from the hospital, she'll find Victor gone, and soon discover that the cruel man everyone fears is about to do something that will shock the entire town. Hannah returned from the hospital just before dawn, Ellie sleeping peacefully in her arms. The antibiotics were working already. Her fever had broken, her breathing easier. The doctor said it was pneumonia, caught just in time. Another day or two without treatment, and things could have gone very differently. She carried her daughter inside, expecting to see Victor on the couch, but the blanket was folded neatly, the pillow placed at one end. The space where he'd been for nearly 2 weeks stood empty. On the kitchen table she found an envelope. Inside was the remaining cash, far more than she'd spent at the hospital. No note, no explanation, just money and silence. Victor Crowley was gone. Hannah should have felt relieved. The danger had removed itself from her home. But instead, she felt something strange and unsettling, a sense that something unfinished hung in the air like a question waiting to be answered. The next week passed in uneasy quiet. Hannah went back to her cleaning jobs, stretching the money Victor had left, trying not to think about where it came from or what it meant. Logan returned to school. Maya sang a little louder. Ellie's cough faded to nothing. Then the letter came. It arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a courier in a dark suit who waited for her signature like he was serving a warrant. The envelope was heavy, official, stamped with the seal of the county courthouse. Hannah's hands shook as she opened it. Legal language swam before her eyes. Whereas in pursuant and hereby ordered, she had to read it 3 times before the meaning sank in. She was being summoned to court. In 2 days. Panic seized her throat. This was it. The eviction she'd been waiting for, the final blow. The trailer wasn't even in her name. She'd been renting month to month from a landlord who'd stopped cashing her checks but never told her to leave. Now someone had noticed and they were taking even this away. Mrs. Chen agreed to watch the children. Hannah borrowed a dress from the church donation bin, pressed it carefully, and braided her hair with trembling fingers. She walked to the courthouse because she couldn't afford gas, arriving with dust on her shoes and fear in her chest. The courtroom was small, wood-paneled and dim. A handful of people sat scattered in the gallery. Marcus from the auto shop, Mrs. Chen, who'd insisted on coming for support. A few faces Hannah recognized from town but couldn't name. And at the front, standing beside a lawyer in an expensive suit, was Victor Crowley. He looked different, Still damaged, his leg in a proper cast now, leaning on a cane, but dressed in dark clothes that spoke of money and power. The hardness in his eyes remained, but something else lived there too, something Hannah couldn't quite name. The judge entered, and everyone stood. Hannah's legs barely held her. What happened next would replay in her mind for years, each detail sharp as broken glass. Victor's lawyer stood and began speaking. Words poured out, legal terminology that Hannah struggled to follow. Then the meaning began to crystallize, impossible and real. All of Ellie's medical bills, both past and future, had been paid in full through a trust established in the child's name. The land where Hannah's trailer sat had been purchased, not by some corporation planning to evict her, but transferred into her name, free and clear, hers. A fund had been established for Logan and Maya's education, enough to see them through college if they chose. The lawyer continued, but Hannah couldn't hear over the roaring in her ears. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. People like her didn't receive miracles. They survived. They endured. But they didn't get saved. Victor rose, leaning heavily on his cane. He turned to face the small gallery, his gaze sweeping over the townspeople who'd spent years fearing him. "I spent my whole life being feared," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet room. "I built my power on other people's losses. I told myself it was business. That sentiment was weakness, that survival meant being harder, crueler, more ruthless than anyone else." The courtroom held its collective breath. "Then I nearly died on the side of a road nobody travels," Victor continued. "And the only person who stopped was a widow with 3 children and barely enough food to feed them. She had every reason to leave me there. I'd helped destroy her life without even knowing her name." His voice cracked just slightly. "Instead, she brought me into her home. She fed me from her own children's plates. She spent money she didn't have on bandages and medicine. She saved my life." Hannah felt tears streaming down her face. "For 2 weeks I watched what real strength looks like," Victor said. "A boy who divides one sandwich into 3 pieces. A little girl who sings hope into the dark. A mother who goes hungry so her children can eat. They had nothing, and they shared it anyway. They showed me mercy I didn't deserve and kindness I'd forgotten existed." He turned to look directly at Hannah. "I can't undo the damage I've caused. I can't give back what I took from the Hutchinsons, from the families I evicted, from everyone I hurt in the name of profit. But I can change what I do from this moment forward." Marcus spoke up from the gallery, his voice tight with old anger. "And we're supposed to believe you just like that? One good deed erases everything else?" "No," Victor said simply. "Nothing erases it. I'll carry that weight until I die, but I can choose to stop adding to it. I can choose to be the kind of man who deserves the mercy I was shown." The judge cleared his throat, bringing formality back to the proceedings. "The transfers are legal and binding. Miss Miller, the property and funds are yours. This court is adjourned." Hannah sat frozen as people filed out, their whispers filling the air like static. Mrs. Chen squeezed her shoulder. Marcus shook his head, but didn't look angry anymore, just confused, uncertain, like the world had shifted beneath his feet. Victor approached slowly, his cane tapping against the tile floor. "Why?" Hannah managed to ask. "Because you showed me what I'd become," he said quietly, "and what I could still choose to be." He turned to leave, and Hannah watched the man everyone had called a monster walk away, transformed by the simple act of being seen as human. In the final chapter, we'll discover how one act of mercy ripples outward, changing not just 2 lives but an entire community, and what Hannah learns about the power of compassion to transform even the hardest hearts. 6 months passed like water finding new paths through old stone, reshaping everything it touched. The trailer still stood behind the abandoned gas station, but now it sat on land that belonged to Hannah. She'd planted flowers along the edges, wildflowers that cost nothing but time, their bright faces turning toward the sun each morning. Logan had helped her build a small fence from reclaimed wood, crooked and imperfect, but theirs. Inside, the refrigerator stayed full. Not extravagantly. Hannah would never be comfortable with waste, but full enough that she didn't have to count crackers or water down soup. Ellie's prescription bottles lined the bathroom shelf, her breathing clear and strong. Maya had new shoes for school, bright red ones she'd chosen herself, and she wore them even inside because she loved them so much. Logan still looked too serious for 8 years old, but sometimes now Hannah caught him laughing with the other boys at recess. Sometimes he forgot to be the protector, the stand-in father, and just let himself be a child. Hannah worked fewer hours at her cleaning jobs now, but she hadn't stopped. The money Victor had provided was set aside for the children's future, untouchable. She would earn her own way, just as she always had. But now when she walked to the small grocery store in town, she didn't calculate every penny. She could buy fresh fruit. She could choose real butter instead of margarine. Small mercies that felt enormous. Victor Crowley hadn't disappeared. That would have been easier, cleaner. The villain exits stage left, leaving his good deed as the final act. But real transformation didn't work that way, and Victor seemed determined to prove that change was more than a single gesture. Before we close this story, we want to thank you for watching. If this journey has moved you, please subscribe to our channel and share it with others who might need to hear this message. Your support allows us to keep bringing these powerful stories to life. Every subscriber helps us reach more hearts. Word spread through the county like wind through wheat fields. Victor Crowley was backing small businesses, not with the predatory loans he'd once offered, but with fair terms and genuine support. The Rodriguez family reopened their restaurant with Victor's financing, interest-free for the first 2 years. The Peterson farm on the edge of foreclosure received an unexpected reprieve when Victor bought their debt from the bank and restructured it into something manageable. Not everyone accepted his help. Jim Hutchinson spat at Victor's feet when he approached with an offer to fund Emma's return to college. "You think money fixes what you broke?" Jim's voice shook with years of rage. "My daughter lost 4 years. You can't buy those back." Victor stood there and took it, his face carved from stone but his eyes holding something that looked like understanding. "You're right," he said quietly. "I can't. But I can make sure no other father has to watch his child's dreams die, because I needed another property in my portfolio." Jim walked away, and Victor let him go. Some wounds ran too deep for redemption, and he seemed to know it. But slowly, reluctantly, the community began to shift. Not forgiveness, that would take years, maybe generations, but a cautious recognition that the man they'd feared was trying to become someone different. One evening in late autumn, Victor appeared at Hannah's trailer. She opened the door to find him standing there with his cane, his face weathered but somehow lighter than when she'd first seen him bleeding on that dark road. "I'm leaving," he said without preamble, "selling most of my holdings, moving to the coast, starting something new." Hannah felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name, not loss exactly, but the strange sadness of a chapter closing. "I wanted to thank you," Victor continued, "for not leaving me on that road, for showing me there was still something in me worth saving." "I didn't save you," Hannah said softly. "I just didn't let you die alone." It was enough. His eyes held hers, and for the first time she saw no hardness there at all. Just a man who'd been given an undeserved second chance and was trying desperately to earn it. After he left, Hannah stood on her small porch and watched the sun set over land that now belonged to her. Inside she could hear her children playing, Logan reading to his sisters, their voices rising and falling like music. She thought about that night on the road, about the choice she'd made to stop, to help, to show mercy when every logical instinct screamed to protect herself and her own. She'd been so afraid of the stranger, afraid of the consequences, afraid of what helping the wrong person might cost. But sometimes helping someone who's fallen doesn't just save their life. Sometimes it saves your own in ways you never expected. The world had taught Hannah that she was invisible, that widows with 3 children and $20 worth of groceries didn't matter. But she'd learned something more powerful on that dusty road, that mercy isn't about deserving. It's about choosing to see the humanity in someone, especially when they've forgotten it themselves. Victor Crowley had been the cruelest man in the county. He'd destroyed families, crushed dreams, built an empire on other people's suffering. He was still accountable for all of it, but he wasn't only that anymore because one woman who had every reason to walk past chose to stop. Hannah went inside, gathered her children close, and whispered a prayer of gratitude for the mysterious way grace works, how it transforms not just the one who receives it, but the one who offers it as well. In the end, not every monster is born a monster, and not every act of kindness saves just one life. Sometimes mercy saves two.